How to cut down your meetings by at least half, a 5-step method. This is the 7th edition of my How to Flourish newsletter. It's available to read on Substack and LinkedIn, and there's also video and audio versions of it accessible through both of those, and the video version of it is also accessible on my YouTube channel. The highlights of this blog are, first, why it's important to reduce the time you're spending in meetings. Second, 2 key questions to ask about any meeting. And third, the 5-step method for cutting down your meetings by at least 50%. What would you do if you had an additional 27 hours a week? Spend more time with friends and family, exercise and sleep more. Start that hobby you've always longed to try. Read those books that have gathered dust on your shelf for years, or all of these. Or you could work a 4-day week, maybe even a 3-day week, and more of that time could be spent doing meaningful work. And in the article, I've linked to an important article by Leslie Perlow at the Harvard Business School on meaningful work that set the stage for discussions about something called time famine, which I'll talk about later in this blog. Meetings are a huge time suck. Most of us have way too many of them, and most of them are, frankly, a waste of time. Even useful meetings are usually way too long. The good news is there's an effective method of massively reducing the time you spend in meetings while only increasing your productivity, efficiency, and effectiveness, both for yourself and your team. This method can also improve team building, even though you reduce the time you spend in meetings. Most importantly, getting this time back can significantly improve your health, happiness, and well-being because you can put the time to much better use, investing it in your relationships, health, and activities you love. Now, I've developed this method through coaching or training thousands of clients, over 700 of whom I've coached one-to-one, many of whom had enormous meeting schedules when we started working together. Some of them had over 30 hours a week of meetings. Every client who has implemented this method has significantly reduced the time they spent in meetings. Some cut a schedule of over 30 hours a week down to a maximum of 3 hours a week. Now, that's a reduction of at least 27 hours a week. Imagine what you could do with an additional 27 hours a week. Sleep deprived? Not anymore. More quality time with your loved ones? Plenty. Got time to work out today? Sure. Enough time to finally read War and Peace? Absolutely. Now, when we reduce meeting time, we also reduce the time associated with meetings. Scheduling, writing agendas, circulating minutes, following up on actions, and so on. In his latest book, Slow Productivity, which I highly recommend, Cal Newport points out that we tend to massively underestimate the administrative overhead associated with meetings, which can take at least as much time as the meetings themselves. So, cutting back on meetings could also get you back much of the time taken up with administrative overhead. The following method is described for people in a position to make decisions about meetings. For those of you not in this position, for example, it's up to your boss whether or not to cancel a meeting, I will post a future blog on how to most effectively communicate to the meeting's decision maker that this method is followed. After describing this 5-step method, I offer responses to common objections to it. All right, step 1. Cancel all unnecessary meetings. Now, to figure out if a meeting is unnecessary, to figure out if a meeting is necessary, ask yourself the following 2 questions. First, does this meeting need to happen? In other words, will anything bad happen if we don't meet? And second, is there a strong chance something very good will happen if we do meet? If the answer to both those questions is no, cancel the meeting. Step 2, reduce the length of all meetings. So for any meetings that remain in your schedule after following through on step 1, ask yourself this: What's the minimum amount of time we need to meet to achieve the meeting's objective? There's rarely a need to meet for longer than half an hour. That's enough time for a team to make decisions and agree on key actions. So default all your meetings to a maximum of 30 minutes. Only meet for longer if there's an exceptionally good reason to do so. For example, it's your first meeting with a high-stakes client. But don't stop there. Any 30-minute meeting can be done in 25. So if you've reduced a meeting to 30 minutes, now reduce it to 25. Google Calendar has a useful function called Speedy Meetings. I've linked it in the blog, which shortens your preset meeting time, that is the default time that Google Calendar will schedule for your meetings, by 5 minutes. So if your preset meeting time is 30 minutes, your meetings will automatically schedule for 25 minutes in your calendar. And there's a link to Speedy Meetings and an illustration of how you do this in the blog. But don't stop here either. If you can reduce the meeting to 25 minutes, you might be able to reduce it to 15. If the meeting is a check-in with a small team, or it's to make a decision on an important but not complex issue, you can probably do it in 15 minutes. Now, to identify whether a meeting can be reduced to 15 minutes, ask yourself slightly different versions of the two questions I posed earlier. First, will anything bad happen if we reduce this meeting to 15 minutes? And second, is there a strong chance something very good will happen if we meet for longer? If the answer to both those questions is no, shorten the meeting to 15 minutes. Now, that 30-minute meeting has been halved. All right, step 3, reduce the frequency of all meetings. Many people have recurring weekly meetings for no other reason than it just being common practice, the norm, or to check in, whatever that sometimes means, right? These aren't good reasons to meet. Meet if there's a need to meet. For instance, a problem that can be solved much more effectively over synchronous discussion rather than back and forth asynchronous messages. So take a look at any recurring meetings in your schedule. Now ask yourself another variant of those two questions I've raised twice so far. First, will anything bad happen if we only meet half as often? Second, is there a strong chance something very good will happen if we continue to meet as often as we currently are? Again, if the answer to both those questions is no, reduce the recurring meeting by half. So if you meet twice a week, reduce it to once a week. If you meet weekly, reduce it to every other week. And if you meet every other week, reduce it to monthly. Step 4, schedule all meetings outside your optimal focus time. What time of day do you focus best? This is when you absolutely shouldn't schedule any meetings. Meetings are rarely occasions when we do work that requires our optimal focus or exerts our cognitive capacities to their limit. They're usually occasions for completing logistical tasks, agreeing or following up on actions, or receiving updates from team members, the majority of which could all be completed asynchronously. Focus best in the mornings. Don't schedule any morning meetings unless you have no other option. Protect that time for your most important work. Personally, I focus best in the mornings, and I also prefer to exercise earlier in the day, either first thing or later in the morning. So as a rule, I don't schedule any meetings before 2 p.m. unless I have no other option. Now, an example of no other option would be, for example, an important meeting with a client who's based in Australasia, where when I'm in the UK, there's just no other option to either meet in the morning or the evening. And believe me, I will try and meet in the evening instead of the morning as much as possible. But if that's not possible for the client, then fine, we'll meet in the morning. And then I'll try and meet as late as possible in the morning. Like, can we meet at 11 a.m., let's say, right? But that's me. That's the time of day I focus best in the morning. If you focus best later in the day, then maybe that's the time you free up from any meetings and you do your meetings earlier in the day. Just find out what time of day you focus best, you do your best, deepest work, and don't schedule any meetings during that time. All right, step 5, change the form of all meetings to what saves most time. Only your most important meetings need to ever be in person, for example, for offsites or to meet with new high-stakes clients. Now, you might also enjoy these meetings more because they're in person. I often love meeting in person because the majority of meetings I have are online, but face-to-face meetings take much longer, given the time it takes to commute to meet with a person, and that it's usually weird to dash off after meeting someone in person for 30 minutes. Okay? 30 minutes goes like that when you're in person with someone. So it's often much longer. It could be 90 minutes, even 2 hours, right? And it's rare that you have a 2-hour online meeting. So as great as in-person meetings often are, limit them only to those where there's excellent reason to meet face-to-face. Okay, for example, it's with an important new high-stakes client. It's an important meeting with your colleagues. It's with colleagues who are also close friends, and so on. But even these types of meetings, and even if you enjoy them a lot, they don't need to be in person every single time. Okay, it's fine to occasionally meet face-to-face. And you might find that those meetings are more effective. In fact, you probably will find that those meetings are more effective and more fun if the expectation isn't that you meet in time every single time, given how much longer they take, how much more hassle they are, okay? As long as you meet reasonably frequently in person and other times meet online, that in most cases is fine and will preserve the enjoyment you get from meeting in person and all the benefits it has, whilst also saving you a lot of time, all of you a lot of time. Everyone will appreciate it more. Okay, now to use the following process to change the form of all your meetings to save time. First, if the meeting is in person, ask yourself this: can it be done over Zoom or whatever video conference software you use without any significant negative impact on outcomes? Okay, can it be done over Zoom instead of in person without any significant negative impact on outcomes? If it can, shift it to Zoom. Okay, and again, if you want to occasionally meet in person, great, do it occasionally, but you don't have to do it every single time. Now, if it can be done over Zoom, ask yourself a variant of that question I just asked. Can it be done over a phone call without any significant negative impact on outcomes? If it can, well, now you can take the call by going for a walk rather than sitting at your screen for yet more hours. Okay, now if it can be done over a phone call, ask yourself this: can it be done over an email or message without any significant negative impact on outcomes? If you just reach level C, well, then you've just cancelled the meeting. Well done. Okay, so that's the 5-step process: reducing the amount of meetings, the amount of time you spend in meetings, the frequency of meetings, the duration of meetings, and also changing the form of meetings to save you a lot of time as well. Okay, now let's go through some common objections to this method. Objection 1: but surely reducing meetings will reduce productivity. No, it's more likely to increase productivity. You're most productive when you're doing what Cal Newport calls deep work, work that requires you to focus without distractions for a significant time on a cognitively demanding task that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their limits. The activities you do during deep work, Cal Newport writes, quote, create new value and improve your skill, end quote. The reference for that is his book, Deep Work, page 3, and there's a link to that in the blog. And I will post a blog soon on deep work and the associated concept of shallow work and how to do more deep work. Now, meetings are rarely occasions for deep work. You can do deep work in teams, but this generally requires each team member to work in silence, checking in occasionally for feedback, or to contribute a completed subtask to a task the team is collectively solving. But if the team's doing that, there's no need to be in a meeting. They can do this asynchronously, checking in via a communication platform like Slack, which I highly recommend for team communication and teamwork. Meetings take time to organize, even if you optimize the process using meeting apps like Calendly, which I highly recommend, as well as Google Scheduler, scheduling meetings through Google Calendar. And then there's an administrative overhead, as I mentioned earlier, associated with any meeting. Again, this all adds the time taken away from getting work done, so reduces productivity. All right, objection 2. But meetings are great for team building. Some meetings are, most aren't. Many are counterproductive for team building because the time spent in meetings and the administrative overhead, in other words, administrative burden, creates additional stress. Less meeting time gives you time to plan far more effective team building exercises like offsites or staff socials. If you want regular time when team members can meet with you or get together, schedule 15 to 30 minutes every week or two for office hours where colleagues are free to meet with you or each other if they want to, with no expectation that they have to. Now you've given them the autonomy to meet. Okay? Everyone in the meeting will appreciate the additional time they gain from less meetings and the autonomy of being able to check in if they need to. Time and autonomy, those are great for team building, not more required meetings. Now, if you're in the early stages of launching a business and getting to know your team, regular and reasonably long meetings can be beneficial. But even then, try to keep them as short and as infrequent as possible. It'll improve the team's efficiency and effectiveness. And in the early stages of a business, everyone's schedules are even more packed than usual. Again, freeing up as much time as possible will be appreciated by everyone. Third objection. But what's the point in cutting meetings from 30 minutes to 25? It only saves 5 minutes. 5 minutes is a long time if you've got hours of back-to-back meetings. Excuse me, let me say that again. 5 minutes is a long time if you've got hours of back-to-back meetings. Now everyone at least has a chance to grab a coffee and use the toilet. And these 5-minute chunks quickly add up if you've got a packed meeting schedule. Getting that back over 6 30-minute meetings gives you an additional 30 minutes. That's time you can use to complete some of the administrative overhead, which I'm just going to call administrative burden from now on, associated with the meetings, which you might otherwise be working late to complete. And in a world where time famine has become the norm, getting back 5 minutes here and there is extremely valuable and it adds up fast. Time famine is a term I mentioned earlier. It was coined, I believe, in 1999 by Leslie Perlow in an article I've linked in the blog, used to describe the norm of the world of work today, where everyone feels that they never have enough time. Objection 4. But I can't possibly reduce my appointments with my clients. They pay me for my time. I am not suggesting this method be applied to commitments like teaching classes, coaching calls, therapy sessions, giving presentations, and so on. For these and various other commitments, a reduction in time usually results in a reduction in value. For example, a client is paying you to give a presentation for an hour and answer questions for 30 minutes, or coach them for an hour a week, and so on. The method I describe here is to be applied to meetings, occasions where at least 2 people meet to discuss work-related matters in person, online, or over the phone. And final objection, objection 5. But I'm not in a position to make decisions about my meetings. My boss is. I will post a future blog on what you can do to convince your boss to follow this method. All right, the takeaway. Everyone complains about not having enough time. Meetings are a massive time suck. We can alleviate time famine by significantly reducing the amount, duration, and frequency of meetings. Try the 5-step strategy described in this blog to reduce your meeting time by at least half. You could get back several hours a week, perhaps even several days. How much time did you get back following this method? Have you found any other strategies effective for reducing meeting time? I would love to hear about your experiences in the comments or any other thoughts you have about reducing meeting time. Good luck. Let me know if you got any questions.